This evening, we're going to launch right in to setting the bar for the goals of this quarterly conclave, which are twofold. To first of all, have you, each one, experience for yourself the wonderful joy, the great radiating and ecstatic bliss that is the first nature of the Ascended Masters, for you to have a foretaste of that, to sense the co-measurement of what is possible for you here and now and throughout the balance of this embodiment. And the second goal, very similar to the first, is to redefine the meaning of the good life here upon this earth, to actually carve out a set of criteria that would define the good life and redefine it for the rest of the people in the world as well. Even those who do not at present think that there is anything more for them to discover in life. They're very content with what they have, and furthermore, they don't feel that there is anything more that is possible. So it is very, very important that the Ascended Master students understand the meaning of God life, the good life that is possible to us, one and all. As we look into this, you are going to discover kind of an indomitable, uncompromising optimism that flies in the face of all appearances that are less than perfection. This attitude of the Ascended Masters draws a categorical line in the sand and refuses to be burdened by any appearance whatsoever of anything negative within one's own human experience, or for that matter, any appearance in the world as well. Now, the Ascended Masters are not impractical. They're not like Don Quixote, who jousts at windmills, who is all puffed up with an ambition that is greater than the ability to deliver on those ambitions and those goals. So, throughout this next 4 days, you will, we trust, become more acquainted with some of the basis which the adepts in the past, which the Ascended Masters now, and yourselves as well, the reasons why you should trust and you should dare to have such bold, unabashed faith in the goodness of God and the goodness of life as it can be spread out for you here and now, despite all evidence to the contrary. This does require re-educating the psyche, because from childhood on, over the course of countless embodiments, we have all learned to think the wrong way. We have all accepted in our feelings very tragic understandings of limitation about the definition of man's intrinsic nature as well as his goal. So there has to be a retraining from the bedrock level of consciousness upward in order to really and truly practice the Ascended Master love of life, and to come along and appreciate how the Ascended Masters themselves are able to revel in the very goodness of God life in the eternal now, which is for us as well. Part of this goal is to trump so many of the things that are put forth for the youth of the world and the adult of the world as to what should be the goal of life, what should be the ideal of identity that one should strive after. It has varied from age to age. I guess you'd all have to say that pretty much right now, the goal is to be found in periodicals like the Robb Report or many of the magazines on the newsstands, the women's magazines and the men's magazines, that project an image surrounded with material objects, surrounded with different actions, maybe certain kinds of vacations, who's to say? But there is some ideal that is held up as the acme of human achievement that is possible upon the planet. And this is supposed to be where one would derive the greatest joy and goodness. I think sometimes those young people who are exposed to the teachings may feel like they don't want to get too deeply invested too early in their life until they've had a fling with the world and kind of gleaned whatever it is that the world might be offering, the best of the world, so that when they go back to the austerities of their religious pursuits, they won't have missed out on too awfully much. That's part of the fallacy that we as Ascended Master students must begin to challenge and to actually seek to capture the imagination of millions of life streams, that there is a better, happier, more fulfilling and permanent achievement of God consciousness that is possible to us each one, that never has to end. It doesn't ever have to dribble away into lesser states of old age and all of the diminution of life force that occurs as one in the normal course of life approaches their final years upon the planet. So there's a lot of ground that we have to cover in order to accomplish this. It is not merely a question of transferring information or communicating a message to your minds, but it is as much or more important for you to taste of that ineffable life that is the divine nature for yourself. Now, that life is all about us all the time. But when the Ascended Masters approach and we come together in these conclaves, there is a focus of the Ascended Masters radiation that amplifies your own efforts. And so you are able to peep above what might be your own attainment and to see through the eyes and hear through the ears and feel the ecstatic bliss that radiates through the consciousness of every one of the Ascended Masters. When we were inviting you to come to this conclave a few weeks ago, we encouraged all of you to bring the full momentum that you have on the violet flame with you. Because whereas right now your heart chakra, your blessed threefold flame, is already native to this land of great joy and happiness, there is the somewhat dampening factor of the inherited memory body of all of previous embodiments and how that has produced a weighty outer mind and a feeling world that may be somewhat burdened, as well as, by no means should we discount, a physical form that may have over the years absorbed various types of dense matter, all of which has a net effect of not allowing your consciousness, which is radiating from your heart, to express through those bodies. It's almost like someone were to take your physical body and wrap you up tightly in a straitjacket where you couldn't move your arms or manipulate your hands in any way, but you were all bound about. In some regards, the feelings and the mind, and yes, even the physical body, they all have to be accelerated so that you can actually move through different gears of consciousness into the higher gears where the ascended masters may then mesh their own effulgent God consciousness with your own. It does all begin with the flame within your heart, which is also referred to, I might remind you, as a flame of life, as the immortal flame of life, the immortal victorious threefold flame. Earlier, we mentioned the fact that sometimes in the face of adverse conditions and the appearances of negativity that you confront, there might be a temptation to yield acceptance of those appearances. For after all, who are we to actually be master of those outwardly? So one of the first points of instruction that you will be reminded of during this class is the true nature of your threefold flame. There must be the understanding that your flame, your heart, is in fact part of the expression of the heart of your mighty I Am presence, of your great God flame. It is not really a case of duality, where there are two threefold flames, one in the electronic body, the uppermost figure in the portrait of the presence, and a second independent threefold flame as it is beating on the altar of the physical heart. In fact, the way that things actually work, and we'll get into this a little bit more in detail in the next few days, is that at the level of the threefold flame, all realms, all worlds, all planes of God consciousness intersect. The point of the threefold flame is the place where all worlds come together and are one. So one of the ways in which an ordinary human being is able to transcend that humanity and begin to demonstrate the powers of their own God self is by awakening to the truth that has always been true, which is that the threefold flame on the altar of your heart is actually part of the heart of the God presence. They are uno. They are one and the very same undivided God heart flame. That is a meditation and a work of attunement that each disciple is challenged to do for themselves, to actually work on achieving that sense of certitude, of knowing that your heart flame is actually the flame of the God presence, that they are one and the same, and that when you say, I am, centered in that heart flame, it is the mighty I Am presence within you that is actually delivering that fiat. One of the ways in which beloved Saint Germain explained this many years ago, when he was producing some of the miracles of life, he explained that the amount of time it would take the disciple to actually do for themselves what they were watching Saint Germain do by way of precipitation was for them to realize that their physical body was the temple of the Most High living God. The physical body was the temple of the Most High living God. So you are, in your outer consciousness, you are the temple of your presence. St. Paul taught this in his letters 2,000 years ago. Know ye not that you are the temples of God? So that is one thing to say, and it is another thing to actually bring yourself to the galvanizing realization that it is true. Interestingly enough, the conscious realization of that must come first before you can have the demonstration. You might think, oh, after I've done a few things, after I've seen some miracles performed, that will give me the faith that will allow me to believe that this is true for me. But in fact, you do have to mount up that faith and have that realization blossom within you, and then it is that very conscious realization that it is the highest frequency of God consciousness that is blossoming on the altar of your own physical heart. And out through that heart radiates this flow of life and of light and love. And as it issues forth, it is the most high living God who is actually at work. As you hold to that consciousness or begin to realize it more and more, then you are on the hunt, you might say. You've got the scent and you have the grip, the heft of how the path is to be mastered by holding to this sense that miracle of miracles, wonder of wonders, glory of glories, it is true that my true nature is not just a human being or a Homo sapiens or the personality that I wear in this lifetime, but the truth is that I am this mighty, individual God presence in embodiment, awakened to the truth of my nature, and able to invoke limitless amounts of light and life from the heart of my electronic body and send that forth with limitless profusion to produce the miracles of change that have to be done. What is the reason, the justification why we should be so all-fired happy about life? There's a lot of things going on in the world right now that we should be worried about, that we should be perhaps a little bit tentative, if not fearful of. Why should we be so very optimistic? Why should there be a source of joy for us? What is there in the cosmos that could justify such audacious and irrational faith in the face of a very tumultuous outer world? Kind of reminds me of the old Disney's movie of Pollyanna, this young girl who was so irrepressibly optimistic and always seeing the good in every situation. And everyone around her was always harumphing and very condescending about how she didn't really know life as it really was. And once she had a few hard knocks, then she would become as skeptical and cynical about life as everyone else is. Well, the truth of the matter is there's a couple of things going on here. The one situation is if you play by the world's rules in terms of fretting about or being burdened by the appearances that are out there in the world, you are going to tie into those appearances and become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. There will be a limited, mitigated measure of help, perhaps, but not the transcendence of what there should be. This is a very subtle lesson that few actually learn, even though it has been drilled in and drummed in by the Ascended Masters for a very long time. Few actually really learn that there is a certain discipline of consciousness that everyone must apply to themselves, of not allowing their feelings, to accept the appearance that is less than perfection, of not allowing the mind to revolve and revolve and revolve and revolve onto patterns of imperfection that are going on. The only way that any ascended master broke free of the gravity pull of this planet is somewhere along the line they learned the wisdom of holding to a higher pattern. But more than that is going on. Once you at least have begun to trim the sails of the human consciousness within yourself, this allows the transfer of more God life to begin to work in your world. The truth of the matter is that behind this miasma, behind this Mayic dance that we have today in the outer world, there is a ground of God reality, a foundation that begins in the realm where your beloved Holy Christ Self lives. In that realm, which is not so very far removed from your outer consciousness, in that entire world, there is not the slightest shadow of misqualification that has ever entered that world, nor have the illumination that the Christ selves of the race of men who have been obliged to look upon sometimes the imperfections of the outer world, none of that has ever registered in the feelings of the Christ selves of the race or in any of the realms from that point onward and upward through the Ascended Master octaves. This is part of the basis for our ability to revel in the love of life at a time when the world is going through so many horrific outer expressions. It doesn't mean that there is hardness of heart. It doesn't mean that there is an insensitive, callous, uncaring attitude on our part. I think a lot of times people and the most well-meaning students have felt like if you were going to be a good person, you had to enter into and suffer right alongside of others that were suffering. You had to get down into it up to your elbows and your eyeballs and suffer right alongside. That is not the Ascended Master way. And the Ascended Masters would tell you that if you wish to be of benefit, of real, true, lasting benefit, to solve those conditions that you sympathize about, then you must rise above them yourself and direct the transmutative, purifying, healing light of the God presence into those conditions from the level of the Christ and from the level of the mighty I Am presence, where there is a denial of those appearances as having any power and any reality. So our foundation that we stand squarely upon throughout this next time, during which we are going to engage in this new definition of the love of life, is the fact that there is this continent of sacred fire, this charge of the Christ consciousness in the world of the Holy Christ selves, in the world of the causal bodies of the Ascended Masters and the unascended life streams, in the world of the Ascended Master octaves, and in the worlds of perfection that reach all the way back to the very heart of God, which we call and we know as the Great Central Sun. In all of these worlds, perfection reigns supreme. Joy flows. Life is effulgent. Life swallows up everything that has any appearance of less than perfection. It is only in this shadowy netherworld, such as surrounds the earth itself, in the lower mental and emotional world and the physical world, where you find the appearances of less than perfection. The great liberating message of the Ascended Masters is that you don't have to accept that for yourself or for your loved ones personally, or for anyone else who is across the face of the earth. In fact, it is your prerogative, thanks to the authority of the threefold flame, which is the flame of God Almighty. It is your prerogative, wherever there are such conditions, to immediately challenge those conditions, to address them directly. You have no power, you are not real, and to put in place of that appearance of imperfection, God life, God perfection, God wholeness. The difference being that now you are working with what Colin Powell called his doctrine of overwhelming force, because you are drawing upon the limitless wellspring of the infinite presence of life that has billions and billions of more foot-pounds of energy than all of these outer appearances. And so you are directing all of that into those conditions and watching them be healed and resurrected and fulfilling the prerogative to know God as being present where all of those other conditions are. This is how the Ascended Masters are able to be happy and to be joyous through the ebb and flow, the comings and goings, the vicissitudes of human existence. You remember the story of the woman who came to anoint Jesus' feet with the precious, expensive oil of spikenard. And some of the disciples said, well, you know, this is a lavish waste of good money. It should have simply been sold and the proceeds distributed to the poor. And that was not the attitude that Jesus had, that was the way to deal with that situation. No one loved human beings more and cared more about them, but he also had a sense of infinite and limitless abundance, and there was no lack that would require that ointment to have been sold in that way. Similarly, there is a limitless supply of God life that is able to heal each and every condition. The Ascended Masters, furthermore, draw upon the vision that is held in the heart of every mighty I Am presence of every life stream upon this planet. That vision being the victory of that life stream. Do you understand that the mighty I Am presence has the vision of the mastery of each of us? Do you understand that in one way, the Holy Christ Self is the actual living, breathing personification, the incarnation of the decree of the I Am presence for mastery? The I Am presence sustains that personage of the Holy Christ Self close to the boundary between the heaven world of the presence and the earth world itself, and holds to that perfection. And the mighty I Am presence of each of the millions of life streams on this planet doggedly, determinedly refuses to lower its gaze below that perfection which it beholds in the Holy Christ Self. In the heart of that Holy Christ Self, it beholds the threefold flame. And that flame which it beholds is the very flame which beats upon the altar of our hearts. So when the Ascended Masters look to the individual mighty I Am presence of unascended mankind, they draw their joy from the decree and the will of the individual mighty I Am presence, which has the foreknowledge and the assurance and the certitude of the ultimate victory of every single life stream on the planet. And they are able to be happy knowing that that victory is assured for each of us as well. What is needed, frankly, is not more sad sacks, more individuals who are going to wring their hands and say, woe is me, woe is the earth. What is needed is more of this ascended master sense of dominion, sense of overcoming victory that can be brought down into and disseminated out across the face of the earth. And that is all of our assignment, to absorb that from these blessed ascended masters and to begin to share it, to say to those whom they know, you know, there's even a better way of life than what you think you have. There's more joy to be had. And guess what? Many of the things that you have thought were actually part of the fun of life ultimately are not so much good for you after all. You know how it is when you're watching the news, and every week or two, one of your favorite foods, they discover that it's bad for you. It doesn't seem to matter what it is anymore. Somebody's done a study on it and decided that some poor little creature has proven that it's bad for you in the long run. Paradoxically, a lot of things that human beings have been used to doing that they've thought were good for them and were fun have turned out to come with a rather heavy price in the ultimate sense. Part of this price derives from the fact that the certain coarseness of consciousness that those behavior patterns bring with them incapacitate the ability of the heart to derive the subtle, fine bliss of God, joy, and happiness that comes with a refined consciousness. So many of the things that people feel when they find out about the path and they say, I've got to give that up. I've got to wean myself of this or that or the next thing. Be assured, beloved friends, that the Ascended Masters don't want to take anything from you that you want, except maybe the things that they know are actually velvet handcuffs, things that are actually a ball and chain around your soaring spirit, things that ultimately don't produce permanent happiness, but are a rather quick, expensive explosion of the use of the life force in many cases, where it goes up like a 4th of July firecracker. It goes off with a burst of glory that lasts for a few fleeting seconds, and then it sputters out and never more is restored. Whereas when the violet flame is able to gently heal one from those things, the permanent, upraised kindling of the sacred fire and the joy and the happiness that it brings and the ongoingness of it, that is what is the great reward that we have, not only in the future after the ascension, but beginning right here and right now. So I just thought, by way of introduction, I'd rattle off a few things that come to mind that are part of the good life of the Ascended Master way of life. First of all, I would have to say that one of the greatest luxuries that any human being could ever have is peace in their feelings and peace in their minds. Peace of mind, the ability to have a foundation of harmony in their life, to not be beset by worry, by tension, by anxiety, by unnamed, unknown fears that seem to follow one about all the time. That peace is one of the great gifts of the Ascended Masters and of their love of life. Another thing that is part of the good life is a sufficiency and, yes, in fact, an abundance of time and opportunity to revel in the communion with the God presence. I think that's probably the greatest of all luxuries. It's greater than a yacht. It's greater than a Ferrari. It's greater than a ski vacation to Vail. Any of these things that the world might consider luxuries. It's greater than caviar from the Caspian Sea. The ability to have a place where you can be undisturbed and to have time to experience the communion with the higher spheres without feeling like, oh, the alarm clock's going to ring and I've got to go off to work, or somebody's going to call me and ask me a question that I'm going to have to let go of this attunement. That time and opportunity to actually revel in the higher vibration is one of the highest joys that any human being on the face of the earth could ever aspire to. And if one is obliged to spend 70 hours a week working, becoming a captain of industry, and a whole lifetime goes by, and perhaps you've left a bequest of your name on several libraries or other charities, you've done all kinds of things, but if that has stripped from you the time to actually focus on this greatest gift of life, which is the mighty presence, individualized, the truth of your being, and to feel that with your being, then it is what Jesus was talking about when he said, what does it profit a man if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? For you have all of these outer things, but that's just going to perpetuate over and over and over again. Another part of this good life, the love of life as the Ascended Masters have it, is that they have a sense of absolute élan and freedom. Freedom in ways that we will not really fully know until after we are ascended. But let me just share with you that your consciousness was not always confined to a little clay mannequin that you call a physical body. There was a time when every single one of us had a span of consciousness as broad and vast as the Andromeda Galaxy. And with that comes a sense of freedom and liberty and expansiveness that is beyond price, beyond all compare. It is not just simply outer freedom in that sense, but it is a transcendent liberty and freedom to be. One of the Ascended Masters described an experience he had of sitting in the Ascension chair as a young man named Rex. He said as he sat there in the Ascension chair and the life force was expanded within the cells of his physical body, that he felt his whole being just growing and growing and growing and growing until there was no limit to how vast his own consciousness had become. And so that is the meaning of the good life, to have a focus of individuality that is permanent, but to be able to roam the gossamer veils of the Milky Way, of Andromeda, of the Pleiades. The stories of the Greek gods and goddesses and the Hindu pantheon of gods and goddesses, of these great beings that were responsible for the flow of the forces of nature, these are grounded in the consciousness that is ongoing and eternal on the part of the Ascended Masters and the cosmic beings and those from the Elohim. That is the great creative surfboard ride that they have throughout all eternity, where the waves are always perfect coming in. In addition to that sense of freedom, there's something else that is long forgotten, I think, for the part of most people. Most individuals have forgotten what it means to have been a little child before their karma descended upon them. For with the return of the cold, damp, clammy hand of karma coming back upon the consciousness, imperceptibly creeping over the consciousness of the individual, comes this whole inherited round of earthly momentums, earthly patterns, earthly desires, earthly hungers and yens. And for a lot of people, they consider that freedom means that one has the permission or the license to act on those desires, to act on those yens, and no one else being able to moralize or pontificate about what they can or cannot do. And that's supposed to be a very good thing. Well, it may be true that in our society there are such freedoms, and it may also be true, as it is true, that there is such a thing as free will, and God is not going to prevent you from doing that. But what is really forgotten in all of this is what it was like in the state of holy innocence as a young child before all of that came back. And to once again return to that Edenic, childlike state of profound indifference to the gamut of human desire patterns, human appetites, to be free of all of that and to still be alive. My goodness, one's still alive, and one is not solemn and in some convent or monastery, but there is a fullness of life to be had, a greater joy and happiness, and an ineffable sense of freedom to not be any longer even experiencing the draw, the suction of those outer desire patterns. That is the good life. That is the sunum bonum of what there is, and it becomes a springboard into the ability to really wring the juices out of God life and to distill a wonderful champagne of joy and happiness out of all that exists within the realm of God reality that doesn't have the desultory consequences that misqualification of desire and of misqualification of the outer mind have as their result. The good life also means having something of lasting worth to contribute to the universe. The good life means discovering in your mighty I Am presence that there is a unique gift, something that even the ascended masters and cosmic beings will be happy to share when you have the fullness of your mighty I Am presence to give to life. It is your raison d'etre. It is your reason for your individualization in the universe. It is your sacred dharma and labor, the gift that you have to give to life, so that as an ascended being, and even now, one is not here simply to be the beneficiary, a creature of experienced life, but one is a fountain and a source of loving service to life, and the ability of having work to do, a service to render, to be able to engage in something that is building, constructive, and something, lo and behold, miracle of miracles, life is actually interested in the thing that you have to contribute. There is no greater goodness in life than to see the response on the part of other parts of life. It could be other people, but it could just as well be a flower or a tree, an elemental or an angel. For all come to drink at the fount of the one who is ascended. Your mighty I Am presence, likewise, is just such a repository of a very intense focus of God love. And as that presence which you are, you will find that that precious distillation of your own love will be a treasure that will be valued wherever you go. Put yourself in your own shoes. Are we not all just enraptured any time an ascended master catches us up in the garment of their aura? Do we not take out our little cup of consciousness and hold it out to capture every precious drop of that ascended master's consciousness that we possibly can? Yes, we do, because that is coming forth from that ascended presence, all of the lower vehicles drawn up into the electronic body. And it is that precious ointment and distillation of the presence that we drink in, and that all of life loves to love. And so the good life is making that connection to where you begin, even here and now, to break open the heart of your electronic body and to send forth liquid light, light rays, sense of joy and happiness, all coming forth from the fountain of your mighty I Am presence. And knowing that there's no exhausting that source, no emptying that source, that you will be able to dispense as much as life is able to absorb and bring a smile back to more and more and more of life. There is nothing greater in all creation than that. Far more of a joyous experience than just engaging in creature comforts for one's own sense. The good life is also to have the love, the sense of fellowship and camaraderie as it exists amongst the ascended masters, and as we are seeking to bring it into our own community of torchbearers of the temple. There is a reason why the circle of ascended masters who have joined together to try to help this planet is referred to consistently as a brotherhood. It could just as easily, I guess, have been called a sisterhood. I don't know of any gender-neutral terms for brother or sister. Siblinghood, I guess we could call it. The great white siblinghood. Somehow it doesn't have quite the same ring. At any rate, the important point is blood ties, fraternal ties, a sense of family, a sense of belonging, a sense of being included, almost a sense, as Robert Frost put it one time, home is where when you go there, they have to take you in because you're family. So in this case, you have a threefold flame, and that makes you part of that brotherhood, of that fellowship, because your presence and the ascended master are one. There is a greater oneness between the ascended masters and your presence than there is separation, and you are the outer extension of that. So there is no greater thing on the face of this earth than to be accepted by one or more ascended masters and included in their watchful eye, to be included in their communion, to be linked into the mountain climbers who are climbing the path toward the summit of attainment, to know that you have these ascended masters there, holding the balance for you as your guru, sponsoring your life stream, knowing that there is that strong, resilient heart tie with their presence, and that if the need arises in an emergency for whatever reason, that they would be present by your side to seek to do everything to be sure that you arrive at your destination of the ascension victoriously and as swiftly as possible. The good life is also the consciousness of the golden age and the consciousness of lowering perfection all around us. You know, with the passage of time and with the passage of eras, the atmosphere of the mental plane and the atmosphere of the emotional plane of the planet changes radically. We aren't so perceptive to that. We don't really detect it outwardly, but we are subjected to it all the time. What do I mean by this? I'll try to give you a couple of examples of what I mean. I can remember, for example, the first time, I think it was a little comedy film called Back to the Future that took us back to the bebop time of the early 1950s. And of course, I was alive back then. Carolyn was too. And many of you perhaps were also alive back then. What a different planet it was in the 1950s. Some might say, you know, not as good as today. But innocence. Think about the most raucous piece of music there was back in 1952 on the hit parade compared to what we have today. The consciousness of millions and millions of people was radically different than it is today. I'll tell you, unfortunately, one of the things that pollutes the mass consciousness the most is any kind of major bloodletting and violence of warfare. Each war that has come along has drugged down the consciousness. World War I and World War II, Vietnam, each one notched things down, at least here in the West, so that today we have a very coarse outer world consciousness. And it's tough to have to move and to be buffeted about by so many violent and unsavory images that seem to assault you no matter where your attention is obliged to rest, even momentarily. Well, freedom, the good life, the ascended master life, is to actually come to the realization that the plan of the ascended masters is to clean the clock or clean the plow, whatever other colloquialism you'd like to have, to take all the pieces off the chessboard and to lower a whole new fabric of life, which they call a golden age, which is where children are born into a different consciousness, where everything contributes to enhancing the divine image of the individual, rather than making the lowest common denominator of human consciousness what is thrust upon every very plastic and subtle outer consciousness of the child. So the good life is the golden age life, and that is what we are striving to do, literally. Problem with a lot of Ascended Master students in the past is no sooner did they read something that the Master said, then they drew a red line through the middle of it and said, this was just meant as hyperbole. They did that in their consciousness, rather than taking the Master literally, verbatim, in the outer world as meaning exactly what the Master said. And so one of our assignments that we shoulder for ourselves here at the temple is to begin as humbly and simply as we are, to begin where we are, and to begin to lower that golden age consciousness into the force fields such as this, into Coeur de Lion, into the White Temple, a beloved Saint Germain, when that is able to be precipitated, and to begin to recreate a new ascended master culture that would thrust out and fill the void, and to create a great massive tube of light of ascended master culture within which the good life is that we are able to live as if we were in the Royal Teton Retreat or in Shambhala or in one of the etheric cities. That is the highest and best that life on this planet can offer. I might add that the good life also includes the giving and receiving of the heart. Every Ascended Master student is one half of a twin flame pair. And regardless of where that twin flame is across the face of the earth or at inner levels, there is, for each set of mighty I Am presence and Holy Christ cells and heart flames, there is a God flame. That is one God flame for the two mighty I Am presence. And the good life is the giving and receiving of love to that God flame, to the Christ flame, the Christ self of the twin flame, wherever that twin flame might be. The good life is having that ability to share all the rest of this beauty throughout eternity with that beloved one. And knowing that this is an inalienable, God-given, God-fortified perfection that awaits every single life stream, that wholeness and that completeness that is part of the divine plan. For all life streams have come forth out of a God flame, and there are the twin flames in all cases. And so the promise of that is there for every single life stream. There are simply no exceptions to this rule. So the ability to share that experience of life, to know that it is there, is something that is promised for each one of you, and you will all experience it if you have not yet. It's not something that you want to kick over the traces of the divine plan that you have for this life, except to know that here and now you can send your love straight to your Holy Christ self, to your mighty I Am presence, and then up through the crystal cord of your mighty I Am presence into the God flame, which is common to you and your twin flame, and to experience that wholeness and that unconditional, all-embracing, all-contented sufficiency of wholeness and love that is to be had there within the God flame. Speaking from first-hand experience, I can tell you there is no greater luxuriance in life than that love. Going on, to feel another part of this goodness of life, of the love of life. This is a biggie that all of you can begin to have more and more. Little do we realize how we lug around the carcass of our physical bodies with us all the time. Be an interesting example if everybody had to carry around a leg of mutton or half a steer for a few hours and get a sense of what it would have to be to carry around all that excess weight. Well, believe it or not, we do. We have this physical body that we have to lug around with us all the time. And for most people, it's a pretty numbing experience. The consciousness kind of gets dulled in the physical body. In the finer bodies, everything is richer. Colors are more beautiful, finer. You see the life forces flowing through everything. Then you get back into this physical body and you forget all that. As soon as you get back into the body in the morning, you forget all those inner experiences in the finer bodies. And then you've got this big sack of flesh and bones that you have to carry around. And goodness knows all that's been dumped into that poor, blessed body over the course of a lifetime. All the stuff that's in there. It's like putting a candle flame into one of those old hurricane lamps and then more or less putting a suffocating membrane on the top of the lamp. And then your little threefold flame is obliged to try to breathe within that body, keep itself going, and wamp up some kind of enthusiasm outside of all of that physical body. The greatest luxury that anyone can ever experience is not just having other kinds of physical spa treatments. But the greatest richness and luxury that life has is when the pranic breaths begin to fire the cells of the physical body. When your cells begin to breathe. It's like if you jumped off a cliff and you went under the water and you had to kind of struggle to come back up, and you finally got up and you took your big gasp of air. Well, when the pranic breaths course through the physical body now, not talking the inner bodies, but the physical body, it's like each one of those cells is taking a hit of pure oxygen. And it says, oh, this ocean of life, now this is really what it's all about. And that can go on and expand more and more. Takes a good bit of discipline, a lot of violet flame, a lot of resurrection flame. The sacred fire has to really whirl about the spinal altar. All kinds of things have to go on in order for those pranic breaths to really fire. But when they do, and you begin to experience the radiating, ecstatic, fire breath bliss of the mighty electronic body, even within your physical form, and you know that the timetable of your permanent freedom from the earth is now drawing close at hand, that is life. That is the good life. As those pranic breaths increase, literally, if you were to step on a scales, you would find that you were weighing less and less, because the physical body is actually becoming light and lighter. And this can eventually move on into the resurrection flame and move on into the ascension flame. And when an individual feels that within their physical body, they don't need fire water, as the Indians used to call alcoholic beverages. They don't need hallucinogenics. They don't need any of those artificial, chemical, passive things that really are not conducive to this mastery and freedom, but are really just further pollution into the physical body. So this is something that you have to look forward to, and it is the natural estate of the ascended masters. As that prana flows through their world, they are able to derive far more exquisite joy and happiness from the simple, ordinary things of seeing a beautiful flower or a beautiful piece of architecture or painting and so forth. They are able to glean such magnificence from it as you can hardly imagine. I recall in the case of, I believe it was Chananda, how those who came into Chananda's presence, they'd go from one place to another, and they would say to Chananda, how is it that you always have all these beautiful things all around you all the time? And he explained, well, these are the same old things that are always around all the time anyway. What you're really sensing is the beauty of the God aura of a God-free ascended master. And when that light is flowing, everything takes on a spiritual luster and magnificence that is far beyond what the clay of this earth could otherwise contain. So that's why you seem to sense that it is all so beautiful. The highest good that life has to offer is, amongst other things, the restoration of memory, the bestowal of your birthright, the restoration of you knowing the eternality of your being that has always been. As I stand before you tonight, I am in that ray. I sense my being before the world was. And you will as well if you have not already had glimpses of it. And when you have that sense of memory, it's something that no one can take from you, because it's like you won a gold medal at the Olympics. No matter what else happens after that, the fact is you won a gold medal at the Olympics. No matter what else ever happens, the fact is that you as God stepped forth in the beginning as an individualized God presence. And ever since that time, this individual being that you are has been going throughout the cosmos at inner levels and outer levels, engaged in creation, engaged as a royal, masterful personage. And only after a very long process was the decision made by your God presence to take embodiment on a planet such as this. And by that time already, those 7 rings of the causal body were chock full of magnificent coruscating fire gems of attainment. And each of those things was the record of an action and an event that took place in eternity on the part of your mighty I Am presence. And so your presence has the unbroken continuity of self-identity of all of that. And that is your birthright. That is your memory. That is your inheritance, which has always been yours, only you have forgotten it. And it has been covered over by the outer self. We're all like the prodigal son that spent our inheritance and didn't think that we would ever have a place at home anymore, only to find out that when we do come back, the first thing that happens is that inheritance is restored. And so it will be for each and every one of you, that you will have the glory which you knew with your presence in the beginning before the world was. Whatever has to happen for that to take place in your life, it's worth more than all the gold and rubies and pearls, more than all the cars and toys and all the other things that the world puts forth as the good life. That is really and truly the good life. I could go on and on and on. We do need to save some for the rest of this conference. But I would like to just leave you with one final thing, which comes back to life. Life, life, life. Life is perpetual motion. It is perpetual breath. There is something called life that is quantifiable, that exists in the cosmos at inner levels. It is an ocean of fiery immortality that is limitless. It obeys the threefold flame of a God presence. It obeys love. And when you learn that this life is there to obey you, you will discover that you can direct life into conditions and swallow up conditions, swallow up appearances, and ultimately the last enemy, death, is swallowed up in God life and is no more and is erased for you, cause, effect, record, and memory. And you rise out of that life that has swallowed up that appearance, and you are victorious, and you have that sense of overcoming victory, which is the consciousness, the God consciousness of mighty victory. Long before that happens, before that ultimate event happens, you have the prerogative, with the authority of the threefold flame of your heart, to direct life into all of the phenomenon of the breakdown of life, where most of the time what is wrong is that there is a paucity, there is a poverty of life that is present, loss of memory, old age, illness, outer poverty, blight, all of the things that we see as problems in the world are due to a drought of God life as a cup of life flowing over, filling them to overflowing and moving on and on and on. There is in the Ascended Masters the consciousness of a limitless river of this life. It isn't static. It isn't just a pool that's subterranean. It is an ongoing river from the great central sun. It's like a great salamander or a great dragon, the great Leviathan that swims through the seas, and you are able to direct it into every condition that is less than itself. Enough doesn't go in one day, so what? Your mighty I Am presence is riveting that ray of light and life into that condition and holding it there and holding it there and holding it there. And sooner or later, that condition will yield because immortal life is pouring through it and continuing to pour through. So as you contact that consciousness of your own presence where this life goes on and on and on, you will no longer be tempted by the stuff of this world, which will all be quite paltry in comparison to the magnificence of what that life is that is in the Ascended Master octaves. We have a great deal more to talk about this, but I think you begin to get the idea that the Ascended Masters are a very happy company. They are quite joyous in the achievements that God has given to them and hopeful for what God will do through all of us. Their hope is that there will be enough kindling of this understanding, of this vibration of God life, that more and more people will be infected with this joy and love of God life and will want it more than they want anything else, and will reorder circumstances and environments and conditions and band together and pool their energies to remold and reshape the face of the earth in the image of the mighty I Am presence and of Ascended Master life. Thank you.